Okay, we are recording. This is this is the May 14th meeting of the Finance Committee. We have a quorum, so we are in session. Just a few notes regarding how we conduct ourselves over Zoom. When you would like to be recognized, please visibly raise your hand as a member, or you may use the raise hand feature under the actually in the participants. I'm not sure you can raise hand. I'm not sure where that feature is found on this in this mode. But anyway, please raise your hand if you need to be recognized.
Sorry, Dean, I think it's in reactions, Dean.
In reaction?
No.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
Or participants on the bottom right on participants. That works too.
Yeah, if you have your participants window open, you can use that. Right. But the key thing we need to do as a committee is we always need to, any motions before us that we would like to vote on, we have to do it by a roll call on Zoom, just so we're clear on who's voted for what. Okay? Without further ado, let's step into our first item on our agenda is minutes as available. And I believe we have minutes from March 9th. Is that the correct? Or maybe it's, March 9th that are available. Do we have a motion to accept these minutes?
Yes, so moved.
Thank you, John. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay. Any comments, discussion, or edits for these minutes?
I have a quick comment.
Yep.
There's a follow-up item under Article 7.
Yes.
Which is the COLA base for retirees.
Yes.
Who among us is going to follow up on that and get that information before we vote as a committee?
I made a note to myself to remind them to please forward us some information. Great. Otherwise, I'll try to collect some myself. But I did
Great.
make a note of that when I read through these. I do have a note on these on page 5. On page 5, Mr. Banfield asked why the Natural Resources Department is not managing the dredging of Warner's Pond. First sentence, second full paragraph.
Oh, yes.
Everybody see that, or does anybody care?
Yeah.
All right. Any other? That's the only comment I had on these minutes. Basically, my question was why this was being budgeted in the Parks and Rec capital budget, and the Natural Resources had been moving this project forward the whole time. Ms. Hodges responded, but they just need to reflect that the word "not" belongs in there. Otherwise, I think we're ready for a motion on this.
Dean, this is Chris. I have one question. On page 3, it talks about, in the very last paragraph in the middle, it talks about the discussion on the legal fees, and it has you saying that we noted that our January 23rd denial was unanimous. And I just was thinking back to the conversation, Pratishar, we had last meeting where you were saying you think that was not your vote. I just wanted to make sure we were good in that was unanimous vote, because it's referenced here on page 3 in the minutes.
So, Christine, I look back and I had voted no to one of the amendments, but then the overall motion, I voted yes.
Okay. All right. Good. I just wanted to make sure we were all set on that.
Thank you. That's good detail work. Good. Okay. So I think we're ready for a vote. I'm going to call the roll. Phil? Phil? You're muted.
You're muted, Phil. You're muted.
Approve.
Approve. Chris?
Approve.
Greg?
Approve.
Mary?
Approve.
Parshar?
Approve.
Brian?
Abstain.
John?
Approve is yes, is it?
Approve is yes, I guess. We'll say that that's true.
Okay.
D?
Yes.
And I vote in the affirmative. I vote to approve the minutes. So we have one abstention. Brian abstains. Just a question, Brian, why'd you abstain? Is it because
I wasn't there. I wasn't
you were
there
at the
that
meeting?
night.
You're welcome to abstain. My understanding is you're allowed to vote on minutes even you were not present. It's sort of procedural, but not necessary that you were there.
Well, I read them. They seemed fine, but I don't.
Yeah, it's fine. No, we're fine with the abstention. It's fine. It will be noted in these minutes that you abstained. Okay. Okay. Let me close that. All right. The next item on our agenda. Let me just give you a little framework for how I'd like to run tonight's meeting. Okay. I'd like to try to get us out of here in a reasonable amount of time. I'm hoping that we can be done by 9:30. So I've allocated specific amounts of time to some of these items because we could talk about these items very extensively and just not make a lot of progress. So we have not met for quite a long time. So I thought I would open the floor for 30 minutes for us to have general comments on how the Finance Committee members are currently, finding the meeting, finding the economy, how they feel the community is faring, how we should respond as a Finance Committee to the pandemic. There's a lot of chaos, and our voices are just, 15 voices, but we are members of a committee, so we should be willing to sort of put our views out in some public manner. So 30 minutes we'll spend on general comments on the current situation, and then a discussion of the current revenue projection and the direct effects on tax rates for FY21. Carrie made a presentation to the select board. If you have that, Carrie, we may want to just review that in this slot. But also, I know that Mary has done a little calculating to figure out some of the impacts. I think some of that came back from you, Carrie. So the feedback in that, we're going to spend a half an hour on what the revenue looks like. This has already been done twice by the select board. They've had two separate discussions of this, but I think it's incumbent on us as the Finance Committee to discuss that. And then I'm going to allocate an hour to recommendations on the current warrant articles. In 30-minute slots, we make very small progress when we have, get through an article. So we're going to have an hour. I think we can make a lot of progress on a set that we might be able to put on a consent list. But we're going to have to fight through some of this and figure it out. So we'll spend an hour on that. And then at the end of the meeting, I want to spend 20 minutes just trying to figure out the arc of how we are going to do our work as we are responding to the way in which town meeting is playing out and our responsibilities to provide a Finance Committee report, to do our five-year tax projection. There's work that we need to do, and we need to have a set of meetings that get us through that work. But there are also other issues that we probably want to build into those conversations that we maybe want to bring in Lori Hunter, the superintendent, the town manager, to discuss things as we sort of inch toward moving along. And we also might want to have in-depth conversations, bring in the chair of the middle school building committee and have a discussion with them about a large capital project that's underway. So we need to plan the arc of our next set of meetings as we go forward. So with that said, let's jump in. I was allocating a half an hour to general comments, and if there were 15 members, we'd each end up with 2 minutes. Which isn't a lot to say. So I've almost blown most of my time, but I have some very big concerns about how the community is going to just wrestle with its budgets. I am, we see, and there have been some estimates that revenue shortfalls at the state level are going to be somewhere in the vicinity of 25%. This is a very, very big financial hit. The town does not have enough money. We have a very nice free cash position, but that is not something that's going to carry us over, the loss of a substantial amount of revenue. Now, our revenue is based on property, which, town Concord has been very, very stable. It was very stable through previous. I'm going to turn off my television. The background is kind of it's attractive, but it's distracting. Sorry about that. So we were very stable through 2007, 2008 downturn, but we just don't know what kind of impact this is going to have on real estate values, on people's capacity to pay their taxes, et cetera. Those are my comments, but I have a lot of concern, and I don't want to have it totally color the work that we do, but we have to work with where we are. So, Phil, I'm going to give you the mic next, since you're on my screen. You're to my left. So,
Okay.
Got any comments?
No.
No. Okay. That said, Chris, what are your thoughts?
Well, Dean, I'm not that worried about it, to be honest with you. So when I look at, when I listen to, I read 2 memos from Jared about the schools, with one in April and one that he just issued in May, with some updates on where they are from where he's projecting where they would be from a budget perspective.
Yep.
And then I looked at the information that Kerry provided for the town. And the impression that I'm getting is that for the budget year that we have in front of us for FY 2021, I don't see a lot of implications outside of, the property tax base that's really going to hurt us. It could be, I don't know, $2 to $3 million that there's some estimates out there that we have to figure out. But we also have a fair amount of capital spending that I think we can claw back. We don't have to spend it. So when I looked at the overall budget and I looked at where the threats were for 2021, hearing them that probably the bigger threats are in 2022,
Right.
I didn't have a big reaction to, boy, we have to have all hands on deck and there's going to be a lot of changes. When I asked Dr. Hunter at the last session, one of the hearings, is there going to be a big implication for labor here? And her answer was no, right? So she was like, no, we're not going to have an extended school year. We're going to work around it. Now, we don't know what the workaround's going to be, but I think, she has in her mind some parameters around, I'm not looking to spend extra money on labor, which is the huge driver.
Yes.
And from a town perspective and also potentially from a school perspective, there could be, if there are less services, there will be less spending in certain areas, as we've already seen, right? So we saw, when you look at the Jared Stanton memos that show in a couple of months, we saved a fair amount because we weren't in school. We didn't have some of the same expenses. So that was my reaction. That's kind of where I am, Dean.
Okay. Greg?
I'm not going to comment on that. I think that's very true. I have a more outside concern too about what the town overall downtown is going to look like. Sort of in a year with the small businesses.
Yeah.
I know we started to sort of open it back up a little bit, but they're getting hit just hard. So I'll take my 2 minutes to talk about the small business side of things. What's our downtown going to look like a year from now, and project, possibly the tourism growth or something. I know it'll eventually come back. I'm confident that it'll come back because everybody will want to come back and see the town. But just, for 2022 is probably going to be a little bit of a hit there.
Thanks. Mary?
Okay, my thoughts are that for FY20, I think we're in good shape. As Chris said, we're going to be saving some money. And I think Stephen mentioned at the select board meeting that we're going to be getting help from, I think it was FEMA, to help with some of the COVID related expenses. So I feel good about FY20. FY21, we're going to have to redo our budgets. Again, this is something that Stephen mentioned. Right now, with our current budgets, with our guideline that we published in December, and given the revenue shortfalls that we're expecting, our current budget would result in close to a 6% property tax increase. These numbers are going to change, okay? But given our guideline that we published, and with current revenue projections, the hit on property tax is a lot higher than we anticipated when we set our guideline. So I think we're going to have to set a new guideline. Capital spending isn't going to help us. Delaying capital spending won't help us in FY21 because a lot of that debt is already in train. But for FY22, I think we can do a lot, like clawing back capital spending in FY21 will certainly help us in FY22, which is when we might hear we're heading into a recession. We know that. How bad it will be for Concord, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to be bad. I remember when I taught at Bentley, somebody would tell me, if you want to know what's going to happen with the economy, don't look at Wall Street, look at Main Street. And as Greg said, Main Street looks pretty grim. So I don't know. 21 to 22 is what I'm concerned with.
Okay. Arshar.
So I'm concerned about 21, 22, 23. A couple things. One is I don't know state finances, but how much and what will be the change in state financing for public schools in general? Will there be a redistribution if other towns are more hit? Number one. Number two, I agree with what Mary said, but frankly, Main Street in Concord isn't even the bellwether, right? I think it's the Main Street in
That's right.
towns that are a little bit more to the median in terms of income and wealth, and then the spillover effects, particularly on property valuations and folks, willing to pay the prices that Concord typically commands. So you could possibly see a decline in value. And so what does that do to value? And then the downstream revenue for a lagging set of years. I guess those are the top level concerns I have.
Just as a data point, the property values did dip in the 2007-2008 timeframe, and they then have had to climb back out of that. So it is a likely scenario. It's a question of how steep that is.
Yeah, if we go into a recession, which I personally think will be longer and deeper than what happened in 08, then it'll take time for that to recover.
Yeah. Brian.
So I agree with Mary, and I also agree with Greg's comments, Parshar as well. But I think there's a lag in terms of the knock-on effects about what will transpire. I'm not entirely clear, although your comment about, there's going to be a potential 25% revenue shortfall at the state level. Does that is that directly proportional to what they allocate to us? I'm not clear on that.
That's not obvious. Yeah.
So that's number two. The tax revenue implication for the town of Concord, that's not entirely clear to me either, because actually, as I'm looking at some of the data that was presented to us in our packet in terms of total taxes, historically speaking, from a total collected tax revenue collection standpoint, the lag really kind of took 2 years before we started seeing some type of impact. So that puts us out to 21, 22, 23, which means I think this year, I think we'll be able to do what we need to do. But my concern is what are the knock-on effects going into these next three to 4 years, and what's that going to actually look like? Even if you look at, we don't have 08 and 09 on these charts, but it starts at 11, and if you think about that and you look at sort of total taxes collected in the fiscal year, there was a bit of a dip in 12. It started to 12 and 13, 14, and then it started to pick back up. So I think we definitely want to be planning for the future, but I don't necessarily know if we're going to be. I don't think there's going to be an issue for us to do what we need to do in the short term.
Okay, John.
So I fall most certainly on the more concerned side, I think, of the slate. I sent around something to Dean this afternoon indicating that the Pioneer Institute estimates that the unemployment rate in Concord is already approaching 21%. And at the state level, the numbers are considered to be meaningfully understated because of for a number of factors. And at the current rate of expenditure, the state has, I believe, 2 months left of unemployment reserves, at which point I think, some federal intervention occurs that I'm not familiar with. So I'm very concerned about the state. I'm very concerned about the town. A couple of encouraging points would be the Moody's bond rating has been maintained at AAA. I think there's one element that requires our significant attention, and that's the one area that's rated a single A, which, if I'm not mistaken, if I recall correctly, is the operating expenditures to revenues line. But I'm also very encouraged by some of the meetings that I've attended recently, the school building committee and the select board committee. I think there are a number of people approaching this with demonstrable levels of prudence and concern. And I guess my operating assumption would be to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. And if in 18 months, I'm wrong, that would be a good result.
Thanks, John. Dee?
Well, I have to agree with what everybody else has said so far. So I'm taking a slightly different approach to this. And I think about how do we provide support to our schools, the taxpayers, businesses, and the nonprofit sector. I don't want to leave out the nonprofit sector. And I think we need to, how do we think about how we can support? And plan. And then how does that translate into our decisions about allocating funds? Are there things that we could be doing that we don't see on the warrant article for this year that we could be thinking about for future years? Because this is not something that's going to go away in 6 months. So I just would like us to take maybe a long view in how we can provide support and what that means. And then also in the short view, how do we, where do we tighten our belts? Because it's kind of rocky right now, and it's going to be that way in the short term. And some of this is predicated on, are we looking at a town meeting that's going to take place in September? So that some of our decisions later on in the meeting, we can be a little more thoughtful about and hold off on making any decisions right now.
Yep.
And that's all.
Thanks. Dick? Unmute yourself.
Okay, there we go.
There you go.
I thought you were the master muter. That's the way a lot of our meetings work.
We all have agency here.
Yeah. Well, I apologize. I've been a little bit out of the loop because we have a lot of customers who are facing existential issues right now. There are a lot of businesses that simply aren't going to come back. They were too highly leveraged. They don't have the liquidity or resources to survive what's going on. The government is throwing a lot of money around, but because it was put out so fast, the rules are not understood. A lot of small businesses didn't get the money. There are some who got it and are afraid to spend it because they're afraid the government's going to come back after them. We're currently looking at, our real estate folks estimate values right now are down good 10 to 15% on commercial real estate. We don't have quite as good a feel for residential. A lot of customers that are they've had their businesses completely shut down and they're not sure, restaurants, gyms, what have you, they've been shut down. Not only are they when they're going to be allowed to reopen, they're not sure how the reopening is going to go. If you have a restaurant, it's not like you're suddenly going to be packed when they announce reopening. It's going to be phased in. You're going to have social distancing. So there's going to be a definite impact. This can't trickle down to the town and its finances. It might take a little time, but there's definitely going to be a negative impact. That said, if I compare Concord to some of my more well-heeled customers, Concord has liquidity and resources to ride something like this out. There might be some pain, but we're going to be okay. That I'm pretty confident of. So that's my take on the situation.
Thanks. Tom.
I really don't have anything to add. I'm extremely impressed by the comments I've heard so far and the diversity of opinion, but I agree with most of it, and I don't have anything to add, Dean.
Thanks, Tom. Wade.
I concur with what's been said. I heard an epidemiologist say that we're on the, if this is a baseball game, we're in the second inning. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty. And I think we probably have to look back to the 30s to have an understanding of really what's ahead of us. Because, the numbers are so unprecedented in terms of unemployment, and nobody knows how this thing unwinds. So, and then in terms of, revenue, things like state aid, who knows going into next year. And then local revenue, Main Street, it's just, there's so much uncertainty, but I think we've got to build a model that kind of bakes in a fair amount of pessimism.
Thanks. Andrea. You're muted.
Andrea, there's a microphone in the bottom left of your screen. If you move your cursor down there and put it over the microphone, there you go.
Okay, thank you.
There you go.
So I'm one of the Main Street businesses. This is my third recession coming up since I opened in '85. It's the time is very, very different. I didn't know if I was going to make it in '08, but you could see the light at the end of the tunnel. It was different. This is, I've got people coming in, two of my two employees coming in tomorrow to try and ready the store for something, plexiglass shields, but it may be one person at a time coming in, given the nature of the custom framing and how long it takes. You can't survive on one customer at a time. On the other hand, I've had people calling my cell phone. I just got back I was on the Cape for a couple of days, and my cell phone is listed, Facebook and on our message. People can call my cell phone after they've listened to the store message. I had 3 calls today. People are going to meet me at the store out the back tomorrow, and I'll take their things in, and we'll take pictures and do a little bit that way. But I can't get deliveries from out of state from my suppliers because they can't come into the state with their trucks and deliver. So my 2 major suppliers are out of state, and I can get a few things from Rhode Island. Somebody is picking some glass up for me, but I can't get what I need. So if you can't get the supplies in, you can't do the business.
Right.
How we're going to open, trying to get, and this is going to be true of all of the retail businesses, get gloves, get disposable masks in case somebody doesn't have a mask and they can't come in without a mask. There's so many, and the PPP, yes, I did get it. My accountant sent me the latest update yesterday. I've read it 3 times. I have to read it again. It's so complicated. I got in touch with the bank to see what I could get from there. Cambridge Trust has been wonderful, and they're small, personal, but they're not even sure. So I'm beginning to spend a little bit, but in 8 weeks, then what? We're certainly not going to be opening. I don't know. I've got grandkids in the schools. We live here. It's different than 08.
Yep.
People in this town knew they were coming back, and we'd be okay. Right? There's so many unknowns with this. But I agree with obviously, I agree with what's been said. I came in late, so I'm not sure what, if anything else was said.
Okay. I think that's everybody at this point. So, and we managed to get it done within the half hour. So thank you everybody for being, pretty crisp and taking a reasonable amount of time. So the next item on our agenda is a discussion of the current revenue projection and the direct effects. Now, Carrie's made this presentation. We have the agenda packet and stuff, but I'd like her to, for the public, and just, if she could, Carrie, could you run us through the presentation you gave to the select boards? Because I know that we did not have our full membership on that, on those select board presentations. So I'd appreciate that.
Sure. Oops. Can you see the screen or not?
It just went away. For me.
That's what I thought. Hold on. You can see it now?
There it is. Now it's back.
Okay.
Thank you.
So just before I start, I think almost everybody mentioned state aid and what might happen with state aid. And obviously we don't know. We don't have any more information than you do. The legislature is working on a budget or getting ready to work on a budget, but it is likely that it will not have anything in place even before the end of this fiscal year. I would say, based on my experience, there isn't a one-for-one correlation with reductions in state revenues, translating down to local state aid. It's not one-for-one. We haven't seen a time where education aid has been even cut significantly at the state level. Sometimes when there are cuts in state aid, education aid is typically held harmless. The one time I can remember it being cut, there was in that same year, the federal government essentially came in and filled that gap. And I think that was the reason why the state decided to cut the education aid, because they knew it would really be held harmless. It is typically the unrestricted local government aid that is cut. But any recession hits us much later than it hits the general public. The trickle-down effect is much slower. My recollection is that fiscal 11 and 12 were far worse than fiscal 7, 8, 9, from a putting municipal budgets together perspective. But I think the bottom line is we don't know, and it's early. What we do know is, what has happened. This presentation is a week old at this point, and these numbers have been updated. But what I presented last week was what our fiscal 20 collection looked like as of the last due date, May 1, this year versus the last 10 years. And what we saw is that we actually ran the numbers as of May 5th, we had collected 96.11% of all taxes due in the fiscal year. And if you look back to fiscal 19, this time last year, we had collected 96.55, which was actually a much lower collection rate than the prior year. So I had originally projected that out and thought that if we collected about what we did this time last year, we potentially would be under collected by $1.36 million. Now, I sent you out an email and updated those numbers. And even since that email today, we had another payment file come in that was about $275,000. Now, these are not on-time payments, but you likely recall that the select board voted to waive penalties and interest through June 30. So I think there are some people that maybe would pay on time, but are taking advantage of that because it's available to them.
Which actually makes it a little harder to understand what's really happening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. So now I'm trying to okay. All right. So on personal property taxes, we actually were in a little bit of a better position as May 5th this year versus May 5th last year. Personal property taxes are a very small segment of our overall property tax, so we certainly can absorb fluctuations in payment much easier than we can with real estate tax. So at this point in time, I expect that we will not collect 100% of our property taxes levied, but we don't in any given year. So hopefully we will be right now, I'm thinking maybe about $500,000, and that may be different than what was included here. And I have to move my display. Okay. So what we did then, and again, this was updated last week, we went in and looked at what we might expect. And again, this is closing out fiscal 20. So we're expecting, we might expect in a normal year that we would have a slight increase in revenues. And you know this because each year we're adding to our free cash by somewhat under expending our appropriations and then bringing in revenue above what we originally project. But with the pandemic, the impact, instead of maybe collecting slightly more than we estimated, we're expecting to collect slightly less, to the tune of about $820,000. Now, in order to close the year without a revenue deficit, we would need to at least under expend by the amount of the revenue shortage, or we would be eating into our free cash, eating into our free cash certification for the following year. We went through and looked at our expenditures, and based on where we are year to date, we've added in estimates through the end of the year. We've taken into account the fact that we're having additional expenses at the Board of Health. We expect to have some significant increases just in the cost of the election. We have some additional increases in overtime and public safety. But even when taking all of that into account, we expect that we can under expend our appropriation. And this is all town appropriations. This is not just the $49 million that's attributable to the town departments, but overall spending by about $1.3 million. So we would have an estimated surplus of about $500,000. Now, typically, even though we don't plan to close with about $1 million surplus, we like to be there because each year, as part of our spending plan, we take $1 million from free cash, or have done that historically, to provide some property tax relief. So if we do that and these estimates hold true, we will be eating into our free cash by about $500,000. Now, going into fiscal 21, obviously this is a little tricky. It's tricky because even though the governor issued a budget in January, we know that was based on information that is no longer good. We don't know what our state aid will be yet. So we've had to make an estimate for a reduction in state aid. And right now I'm estimating about a 7.3% reduction in state aid. That would result in about a $405,000 loss in revenue. We don't yet know, even though we know the governor has started to talk about reopening the economy, we don't know exactly what that will look like, how it will roll out, what will happen after things start opening. So this, for us, this impacts things like hotel motel tax, meals tax, building permits. So there is an estimate, we're estimating a loss of about 22% of this revenue source, or about $1.9 million. This could go either way. This could be worse than what we're currently projecting, or maybe it's slightly better. But under this scenario, I'm estimating that at this point in time, we'll be down about $2.7 million. I do think, it could range from $2.5 to $3 million. That may change. That may go a little bit higher as we get into hearing what state aid will look like. But assuming that this $2.5 to $3 million range is accurate, that would result in the need to cut guidelines budgets by 2.76 to 3.336% from where they stand currently.
Carrie, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
If you go back to your FY20 expenditure project, back to FY20 revenue projection.
Yep.
Slide. You had sort of described the negative 820, 475 as slightly. You use that term slightly. On a relative basis, what is that? What is that? I'm trying to find a reference point to that. So what do you mean by that?
I'm not sure I'm following your question.
You had mentioned that 820,000 was slightly more than what you would expect, and I was just curious to know what's the range, just so I can better understand that.
So what we would have expected had we not be dealing with the pandemic, based on the trend for this year, we would have expected to close the year with a revenue surplus of about $247,000.
So, you're talking about on a percentage basis, it's slightly less.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Carrie, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Along those lines. So when you did the estimate for fiscal year 20, how many months of actuals did you have? Was it through March?
So when we did, those updates were through April.
The revenue estimates were through April?
Right, because we just did that last week. So we were able to run through April. Now, one thing, you've probably heard me talk before about the excise taxes, the meals tax, hotel motel tax, paid to the state, returned to the town on a quarterly basis, but on a funky quarter. So at the end of this month, we will get the quarter that is February, March, April. That will be interesting for us to see. Obviously, the hotel motel tax is virtually nothing, but I am very interested to see the meals tax, because the meals tax has been strong through the year. Obviously, up until this point, the year looked a lot different. The hotel motel tax was not very strong, and the second quarter of this year was actually $100,000 less. It was about a third less than the second quarter last year. And I don't really understand what happened there, but I am anxious and curious to see what will happen with the meals tax.
Thank you. Just worried about the timing of when the estimate was done and whether we can really gauge what's happened in the last 2 to 3 months relative to just 1 month shutdown.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think one takeaway here, and I mentioned this at the select board meeting, is that, given the $500,000 potential difference over what we would have expected to do prudent budget management, our usual $1 million or percent of the budget is going to require us to go into the piggy bank. I would be willing to do that because that's sort of what the piggy bank is for. Tough times, you want to provide tax relief. You're going to have to do something to provide that tax relief. So that's what so it's not a huge incursion to have to go in there, to the level of $500,000, but I think it's would still be appropriate. That's my sense of that. But I mean, we're going to have to wrestle with, this is a multi-level problem we're going to have to be wrestling with. So, and Carrie, you're doing a great job of trying to keep us posted on how things are flowing.
Yes, Carrie, this is very difficult. I heard the governor today say that he won't really have a handle until July 15th. Based on the pushing back of the April 15th tax deadline.
Right.
I don't know how you're able to come up with some estimates, but I think it's quite clear that the June quarter is going to be a lot more difficult than the March quarter because I think we have to plan on that.
Question to the chair.
Yeah.
You had mentioned that the town meeting was being possibly pushed back to September, or it is being pushed back to September.
Well, that's a call for the moderator, but she's constrained. She has there's a legislative capacity to move the town meeting 30 days at a time. So you're evaluating, okay, are we able to meet? No, 30 more days, push it out. So she can't just declare that we're going to move it to September, but she does not see any way for us to move it, to have it done now before June 30th. It just doesn't feel as though she can come up with a safe scenario for June 30th. So given that, the select board took a presentation today on how to manage a 1/12 budget scenario, which is was an emergency bit of legislation that was created. If you do not have an appropriation from town meeting by the end of your fiscal year for the following year, you may use your previous fiscal year as a model, and you may spend no less than 1/12 of your previous year's budget. And that's an interesting bit of language, no less than 1/12 of your previous year's budget. But so the select board is wrestling right now with going on this month-to-month basis, and the moderator is automatically on a month-to-month basis, but she has indicated that if we push past the June 30th and do not get a town meeting done by June 30th, that she's inclined to really wait out the summer and have it done in September. That's her, and I think the select board. Stephen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the select board or Michael, Mike Lawson is on here, but I think that the select board was in agreement with that basic posture.
Yeah, the statement, and I don't know if people don't get the code red phone calls, but the statement that I worked on with the moderator was ideally late July, but more likely sometime in September. So she's already publicly declared that we're pushed off through most likely until through July potentially into September for town meeting. But she has to do that in increments because of the way the legislation is crafted, but she's already, just to manage expectations, declaring that it's going to be a few months from now. Right. And so, sorry.
Go, Stephen.
So that's why we started, more assertively planning the 1/12 budget, which the select board has to approve and has to be submitted to DOR, and then they have to sign off on it. And I think it was great hearing everybody's comments at the beginning, and I would share that I had the same concerns. I mean, and whether it's talking to the business community or the boards and committees or town, employees, it's a shared set of concerns, which is good because we're all focused on trying to address those same problems. And so I think we won't have to reach agreement on what's a problem and what's not. I think we all see it the same way. One of the things that when we were talking about the delayed impact to be mindful of is, as I think everyone on here knows, the impact to the assessed value of the community isn't known for at least a year because the assessed values are a look back, not a present value snapshot. And so if it turns out that the real estate market didn't really take much of a hit, which with the way interest rates are, which with what the Fed has done with interest rates, it may soften that impact, then the community values will still stay strong. And Kerry's right. In the people that I'm talking, the other managers that I talk to, I don't think we see dramatic cuts to Chapter 70 because the quality of our schools are one of the big factors that sustain our property value. So, we're being mindful of this as well, and looking at local receipts are a big area of focus. State aid is also an area of focus, but it's not as huge a part of our budget. And so, and I think, we are actively talking to the business community about ways the town government can try and be a support, although I've tried to caution that we're limited in what we can do. But anyway, I appreciate hearing everybody's concerns, and we're thinking along the same lines.
Hey, back to Dean. Based on your earlier comments, given the level of uncertainty, because there's just a lot of uncertainty and people are, organizations are really trying to get their minds around what's happening month to month. You had mentioned that we would start bringing people back in. It feels like because we have these shared concerns, and we are incrementally being updated real time, things are very fluid. Does that mean we should be rethinking our guidelines in a more formal way, like to have everybody back in and do this, have some type of dynamic conversation around this?
Well, I think that there's no question that we need, that's what item 5 on the agenda tonight is. What's the arc of our, we need a strategic plan for how we're going to try to approach the next way in which we budget. Like the budget that was filed last December is something that is definitely up for discussion. And so we probably have to really, really reapproach it. So that, let me just pause that, put that to the side for 1 second, because we're now entering this conversation about this 1/12 budget model, which is where you go month to month. And the way this model works is you're fundamentally extending your FY20 budget on a monthly basis. And the state legislation appears to call it deficit spending. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, but I presume that we still have the capacity to render tax bills, but we'll put that off to the side. So in this 1/12 model, you fill out a form, you file it with some director of finance in the state house somewhere. They say that looks good, and they approve it, and it comes allowed to go for the next month. That's how correct me if I'm wrong, Kerry, but I think that's how it's supposed to be done. I don't think that and that conversation is approved by like the finance director and the town manager will present that to the select board, who will approve the form that will be filed with the state, and we will then go into the next month. I don't see a role there for the finance committee. It's a 30-day rolling. You got to file it every month, and I'm not sure. I mean, we can have a review meeting where we look at it and go, "That looks good to us." I'd love some feedback on that, because that. In effect, our advisory capacity in this mode is pretty minimal. I mean, the finance director will present, here's what we think we should do for the next 1/12 of the year. The select board will go, yep, send that to the state. They send it back saying, it may be a rubber, they got to do it for 351 towns. So that might be a rubber stamp. It was like, yeah, you guys are good, go. But that's the process. And I don't see where the finance committee enters into that in its advisory role. That's a concern of mine, but it's the way it's going to roll, I think.
Dean, can I?
Mary, you got any thoughts?
Actually, I agree with you, Dean. I think we don't have a role here in the 1/12. I think our role is, as we know, it's to publish a guideline, to make recommendations on warrant articles, and to publish a 5-year forecast. So I think our role is limited to set a new guideline, taking into consideration the run rate of spending that we're going to have with this 1/12 model. So when we develop our new FY21 budget that will probably be presented at the September town meeting, we'll take that into consideration. But the 1/12 spending model is I don't think we have a role. That's my opinion.
It feels very administrative to me.
Yes.
Yeah. Chris, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted either you or Stephen to just mention the connection between the governor's eventual, I guess, rescission of state of emergency and the town moderator's ability to keep moving the meeting. I thought that was an interesting discussion today. So I just wanted to highlight that point, because she can't keep moving it unless if it's rescinded, if he takes the state of emergency away, it sounds like. Is that correct? Yeah.
Go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, that's correct. Although, as I articulated at the select board meeting, so much of the new rules and orders that are intended to manage this pandemic, this public health and economic crisis, are authorized under the state of emergency declaration. And so if he ended the state of emergency, all of that stuff would go away unless the legislature took action to enact it into law. So I think it's highly unlikely the governor would kind of suddenly remove the state of emergency, because it would be completely chaotic for cities and towns and for the state government, quite frankly. I have, if you look at the state of Wisconsin, where I have in-laws,
Please don't.
I'm sure Governor Baker watches the news, and that outcome is the exact thing he's been saying for 2.5 months he does not want to have happen.
Right.
And so I think that he will be very measured in all of this. And I think the 1/12 budget, the thing that's important to remember about that is really spending that the finance committee has already advised town meeting on, because all it is an extension of FY20. Right. So, For example, I'm going to just take a small example just to be illustrative. The land manager is a new position that I had proposed in the FY21 budget. Well, we're not hiring that person, and so 1/12 of that person's salary isn't going to be in the budget, because that hasn't been approved by town meeting. So there's not really new spending, so to speak, or new policies or new programs. It's just paying the bills that we have going right now. And I think, to go back to Brian's point about the guidelines, I agree. Carrie and I both agree that we're going to have to take another look at this. All I would ask of the committee is give us some time, give it some time, give the situation some time to evolve. I mean, I think Carrie and her team have done a great job coming up with estimates that feel really solid, but things are still going to change. The governor's budget, like you said, we're not even going to know till mid-July. And because we're working remotely, and even though we're still providing full services, we're doing it with limited capacity. I don't want to be in a situation where we're just constantly chasing our tails, trying to find guidelines or develop guidelines that are based on unknowns. And so really a resource management thing. I'd prefer that we just hold off until we have data that we believe is reliable. And I think our commitment to all of you is, as soon as we do, we're going to bring it back and get the select board and the finance committee's feedback, and then ultimately town meeting's approval or disapproval. But we're just guessing right now. And I don't want to waste a lot of time. I think the thing we could talk about is Dee's question, how do we be a support to local businesses? How do we, create programs? And we can certainly report all of those efforts to all of you. But I just would ask that we not get too carried away on the guesswork.
Fair enough. I think we've covered this. We have spent the half hour. If there are more comments, I'm happy to hear them, but we're at the half hour point on this item. Are there any further comments people would like to make? I'm open to it.
Kerry, did somebody describe you and your team as rock stars?
Yes, I believe so. We are. We knew it. It's about time there was public acknowledgement of it.
And so modest too.
There you go. Okay. So
I'm sure the FinCom has acknowledged it many times.
So what I'd like to do now is move on to our slate of things that were on the warrant. There are some that I think, would find as a committee that we are going to kick the can down the road until we get through like the budgets for the town or the schools. We probably are not going to come up with any because they're going to be revised. So, but there are some articles here that require our attention, and I think we can pay attention to them and get them out of the way. So I have I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Let me see what I got here. It's not open, so let me open the file. Here. There we go. How do I share screen? There you go. Okay. So this is our set of articles that we have yet to make a decision on. We made a recommendation of no action in the previous meeting on 9, so that's closed out. But we've got a pretty healthy agenda here that we can work on. What I'd like to start with this hour that we're going to spend on this tonight, I'd like to start by trying to collect up a grouping that I'll call something for which we probably have consent. It is typically presented at the Finance Committee hearing on the enterprise budgets that there's very little comment on the enterprise budgets. This year we had a little more comment from the committee than we had in the past because of an appendix that was added in this year's enterprise budgets book, which identified some of the cash that was unrestricted. And so those questions were asked and answered, but other than those questions, there were no real. There you go. You like me in the dark? There you go. There were no real questions. So we have, if you look at this agenda or this list, you'll see 17 light plant expenditures and pilots, 18 solid waste disposal, sewer system expenditures, improvement fund expenditures, water system expenditures, the PEG access expenditures, and the BD Swim and Fitness Center fund expenditures. Is there any interest in collecting those as a grouping or a subset of those as a grouping so that we can take some rapid action and move on to some more thorny problems?
Yes.
I would say yes, unless anyone has any specific issues with any of the individual warrant articles.
Well, if you have it, let's do this. Let's put this. I'm gonna say from 17 through 23. Mm-hmm. I'm going to propose that we make this into a consent vote where we vote for all of them at once. And I'm going to walk through them. And if somebody wants to take it off and have it be discussed separately, we'll take it off. Okay, does that make sense?
Sure. Is that a motion then, Dean?
Dean,
Yeah.
I just had a question. I agree with the approach. I'm kind of curious. The warrant articles have specific dollars attached to them, right?
Some of them just say we're going to expend all the revenues from the fund. Like I think do I have my, here's my warrant.
Only in Article 17 does, and it's.
So my only question is, if between now and the actual town meeting, we decide, the departments and Stephen and the select board decide to change the amounts, is that permissible for the town, for the warrant, or how does that process work if it's even possible? And are we voting then on something that could hypothetically change?
You can reduce, in a motion, you can reduce an expenditure. It is, you can probably raise it a very small amount, but it has to be approved by the moderator. I don't think that there's an absolute prohibition on raising it, but it is, for all practical purposes, you cannot raise a number, but you can always reduce it, because these are just in the warrant. And then when it's moved on the floor, if you move it with a lower number of expenditure, it's appropriate. It's okay.
Dean, if I may,
Yeah.
sorry, you're correct. You can always lower it. The guideline I've heard from moderators that I've interfaced with is 10%, depending.
Yeah, I didn't want to throw that out, because that was the number I had in my head.
But it's written in sand. So I guess what I would say to all of you is, you probably should expect that the motions are going to look different than the warrant. And again, this is one of those things where we don't know by how much or to what extent they're going to look different, but it's fairly safe to say the motions are going to look different than the warrant articles, because this is what makes this time so unprecedented. The warrant was sent to the printers in February, and then everything got turned upside down. You think about how different our world is now than it was when we were going through the warrant articles. And so I think it's really important to remember, as you're considering these, the structure. I guess what I would, if I was going to tell you what I would do is, if I was in your shoes, it would be look at the structures and any policy changes or structural changes that are made to the departments. Also looking at the bottom line numbers. And so I can tell you, there's not a lot of changes to the enterprise funds. They're pretty much status quo budgets. A few minor things, but that's what I would focus on if you feel like you need to make a recommendation now.
Well, just to be clear, these warrant articles. Yeah, Mary, go ahead. Yeah.
I have a well, for example, Article 17, right, pretty much says that the light plant collects revenues and they pay their expenses, but then it does give an explicit sum of the pilot. So are we saying that at town meeting, that number will probably change? Is that?
Maybe. And I think it depends on the fund. I'm sorry because I do know the answer to this. So I want to just share that. Most of the enterprise, the water, sewer, solid waste, light plants, those probably aren't going to change that much, because it's kind of a fixed level of service, fixed customer base, fixed level of expense. BD Center is really the one that is probably going to be different, is going to be more different than all the others, because BD has been closed. It has really harmed the financial status of BD, which wasn't, super strong to begin with.
Right.
I mean, Kate and Ryan Kane have done an excellent job kind of building that up and building up reserves, but it's taken a beating in this, because it's closed and we have no idea when it's going to reopen. So I don't expect the same thing with CMLP and the CPW water, sewer, and solid waste divisions, but solid waste, I don't know if there's going to be a policy change related to the collection and disposal of solid waste that'll impact pricing, but there could be. So I would just it really is more a placeholder for BD than anything else.
Could I just jump in?
Yes, please.
Yes.
So So just to expand, while the enterprise fund budgets that were presented to you for all of the enterprises except Beatty, while there might be slight changes in those budgets, the vote, what will be put before town meeting is not going to change. As Dean mentioned to begin with, what town meeting will be asked for those enterprise funds is to vote that the income from the fund can be expended for the expenses of that operation. So the numbers might change slightly, but you're not going to vote an actual number in those particular warrant articles. You will with Beatty. So Beatty is different.
Pilot for the light plant, possibly.
So the pilot for the light plant, that number should not change because it is calculated based on the prior year sales.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, I'm going to walk through these one at a time. If you want to have a separate conversation about that item, we'll take it off what we're going to craft as a consent vote. So, 17, the light plant expenditures and pilot. Anybody want to take that off? The solid waste disposal fund expenditures, the sewer system expenditures, the sewer improvement fund expenditures, water system expenditures, authorized expenditure from the PEG access and cable related fund. Now, this one does have a number, but the number can be changed at town meeting down and possibly up, but I think it's unlikely to go up. So I think we could still think that's okay. And the Beatty Swim and Fitness Center, which is fundamentally saying, take the money from the fund to pay for the operation of the Beatty Center. It doesn't say how much. It does, so the underlying budget is, as Carrie pointed out, is sort of separate from the motion.
Dean?
Yeah.
This is Dee. I'd like to take 23 off of your consent list.
Okay, that's fine.
And
So
I
we'll take
have
it off.
the reason I'm suggesting this is because I think it would be in the town's best interest if, as we get closer to when we're going to have town meeting, we actually invite, the deputy town manager, and Ryan in, and the manager at the Beatty Center, just to talk to see what kind of needs do they have. And if they are going to possibly present something different in their warrant article, maybe that would be the time that we could assist them.
Okay.
I'm not sure if legally we can,
Right.
but if it just seems as though it might be something we could look at.
Okay. I'll take it off, and I need a motion on the collected grouping of 17 through 22. We're looking for a motion for affirmative action, I believe.
So moved.
Well, do we need any more detail than that, Dean? Do we need to be specific?
I don't. Well,
Why don't you take? Could you just do a roll call for each one?
No, we're going to do a roll
Can you do
call
that,
for
or-
all.
It's a consent
All
calendar.
right.
Yeah.
So the motion should be that we are to move affirmative action for the collection of articles 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22. Can I get that motion?
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Dee is seconding it. Okay. Now we're going to go for a roll call vote on this. Okay. Chris.
Aye.
I'm Dean, and it's aye. Greg.
Yes.
Mary.
Yes.
Dee.
Yes.
Dick.
Yes.
Tom.
Aye.
Andrea.
Yes.
Wade,
Yes.
Harshar,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Peter.
Yes.
Yay. Okay. I think that is a unanimous consent on those. So those are all moved for affirmative action. So should we go back? Where should we jump back to our list? Should we just take it from the top and start with the personnel bylaw amendment? Anybody have anything that they? I would recommend that we move to talking about number 6. And one of the reasons I would is because we have a citizen who would like to at least speak to it, and so we should try to come to some kind of decision on it. It's not something that will have make very much of a difference in terms of the pandemic. I don't think the pandemic would affect whether or not we decide to approve of or recommend affirmative action on this bylaw change. This is a pretty significant thing, but it doesn't have any real financial impact on the community. So should we talk about that one? Anybody else got any other ideas?
No, let's talk about it.
Okay. So
I'll start. I'll start.
Okay, good.
I listened to Alan Quackenbush's presentation at the hearing, and it seemed to me that what she was saying was that this particular committee was kind of obsolete, and then was pretty much doing what the town manager and the head of HR was recommending to begin with. But then I heard comments from the people in the room that were saying that without this committee, there's no independent group of citizens outside of town government, town staff to actually look at grievances that town employees might have. So I'm really, I don't think I know enough about this. That's what I heard at the hearing. So I don't think I really know enough about this article to understand what's the need for this, and what are we losing if we give this up. And if there's a problem with this committee, maybe solving the problem, the committee, making it a more robust committee is the solution, not just simply, it looks like we're dissolving it with this. So that's what I'm thinking.
I'm wondering if there's a way to figure out. I mean, I think we would, if we would suggest that more study, I think we would have to recommend no action on this. And if the proposal on the table could be fine-tuned to continue to have the grievance oversight capacity of that committee still have some teeth, and yet allow the town manager to do the work that is typically being rubber stamped, then maybe we just would recommend further study, which would mean we recommend no action. I mean, that seems like an outcome that we could think about.
Dean,
Yeah.
it's Stephen Crane. I can answer some of those questions if needed.
Okay, we'll put it down. We're going to let the committee have a few words back and forth, and don't worry, we'll hear from you, Stephen. It's okay.
Dean, can I ask a question of Stephen and maybe others?
Yep.
And maybe you know the answer. I wasn't at the hearing. The current committee, how often has it taken up grievances, et cetera, from town employees? Or is that a theoretical, or is that not theoretical, is the wrong word? Is that a power it has but has exercised, or hasn't exercised much?
I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
That question was asked at the hearing. That
Go ahead,
question was asked at the hearing, and it's in the minutes that we just approved.
Oh, good.
So they pretty much said that they didn't do it very often, and the woman actually mentioned she had no recollection of them ever doing it, but that was since she was there. Let me see if I can find it here.
Yeah, the reason I asked
My recollection was that it was rare.
The reason I asked the question while you're looking is and maybe I'm wrong, and I know, Stephen, you've got your hand up to answer a couple of questions, but from my perspective, it appears that the town manager, maybe the select board, but definitely the personnel board, all are aligned on the recommendation to do this. And so it kind of behooves us to maybe take their recommendation, and to the extent that there are grievances, I'm not sure why a town manager or even a citizen couldn't go to the select board, which actually is responsible for supervising and managing the town manager ultimately, which is where the buck stops. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah.
You want to weigh in here?
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And I'm sorry. So first I want to say is this really wasn't my thing. When I started, this was something the personnel board, I think, had been talking about for a number of years. And if you look at the minutes of their meetings, or if you saw Alan Quackenbush's presentation, it had been a number of years that they had discussed doing this. And so I just supported their effort to do it. I don't think there was there was no memory in Amy Foley's mind, and Amy's been here with the town for a long time, of ever doing grievance. And I think the key thing to remember are 2 things in terms of what that really meant. The decision of the personnel board was simply a recommendation to the town manager as the appointing authority on any grievance. So there was really kind of a circular reference kind of thing there anyway. And the second thing was, this only applies to non-union personnel. So you have a fair amount of the town's workforce for whom this does not apply, because their working conditions and discipline are covered under collective bargaining agreements. And so it didn't capture everybody, and it wasn't really a used tool. But what the personnel board did represent was potentially a liability, because of the changes that happen so rapidly in employment law. It has a group of citizens that could make a decision on behalf of the town that is not consistent with employment law. And our labor council had kind of had advised us, that we do have a liability issue. And in terms of like reclassifying positions and being more nimble and dynamic to try and attract the best talent we can, having to have a personnel board meeting to change titles or things like that, it's very limiting. And when we have an evolving workforce, especially now, it's something that the personnel board themselves viewed as something that could potentially hold the town back, and didn't have really a lot of, practical impact on operations anyway.
Greg, you had your hand up?
Question? Yeah. Can I just get a little historical sense of the finance committee, guidelines on stuff that doesn't appear to be very, related to finances very much?
Why are we
Thank you,
looking
Greg.
at this? I know, me too. I'm like, why are we doing this?
Okay.
We spent more. We've already spent more on this than the 17 through 9 that we just voted to approve.
Let's pass.
I didn't know if there was a historical thing that we say yes to, or we have we go through every single article. So that's what I wanted to understand, actually.
Well, the budgets of the schools and the town are somewhere in the 70 to 80% personnel. So the in which we manage our personnel has a pretty big impact on finance. Now, we did decline to take a position on the planning board presentations that had to do with adding rooms to homes and, 2-family housing. And that's a financial thing, and we declined that one. But on this one, this is a more direct impact on the town's budget, is how they manage their personnel, and et cetera. So I do think that it's at least within the zone of something that the finance committee should have an opinion on. It has an impact on the way things are structured. D.
Yeah, I want to go back to a previous comment, and it has to deal with the like a grievance. And it seems to me that that should be an independent function. So if this warrant Article 6 passes, there would be no independence with regards to a grievance or an issue. And so I don't know how, what's the proper place for that? I'm not an employee, a PR person or a personnel person. I don't know those kinds of things. But how do we maintain the independence of a grievance from the other work performed in personnel? And if it has gone away because this committee referred their decision back to the town manager and the town manager could either accept it or not, then I don't, that's not proper.
But it seems as though that's the way it's structured. I have a few hands up here. So I can't. Tom, we're going to go to Tom and then we'll go to Chris.
Yeah, Dean, I agree with Greg's comment that although this is a very important matter, I really don't think it is within the direct purview of the Finance Committee. And although I have some strong feelings about it myself, I have them as an individual, not as a member of the FinCom. And so I would just as soon, although I think you ought to hear I think there's at least one citizen who's come specifically to be heard by the Finance Committee, and I think you ought to allow him to do so. But I wouldn't spend much more time on this myself.
Chris, you had your hand up? Dick has his hand up.
I did. I agree with what Tom said. I don't think we should be dealing with it. It goes back to the reason why we can't answer the questions. We are not an HR or a personnel group. This is not our purview. That's why we can't answer those questions. We shouldn't be dealing with it. That's all I have to say.
Dick?
Christine is absolutely right.
Okay. And I'm now going to go to Mark Howell, who's patiently waited for this article to come up for discussion. So Mark, would you like to weigh in?
Absolutely.
Please identify yourself.
Hi, I'm Mark Howell, and I am in a unique position to talk about this one, I think. I've sat in your seats. I served on the Concord Finance Committee for 6 years, including being its chair. So I have a real sense of what the Finance Committee should get involved in and not get involved in from that experience. I served the town as CIO for over 8 years as well. So I understand what the function of the Personnel Board is from the perspective of working within that system and what its benefits are. So I do think that there are some real problems with this article. I have actually scoured the Personnel Board's records, their minutes and their agendas, and spoken at length on a number of occasions with the chair. I can tell you that anybody who represents that the Personnel Board has been discussing this extensively over the year is really misrepresenting that documentary record anyway, which is very scant. Concord is a community that thrives on process. The reason there's a Personnel Board in the town charter, which is what creates it in the first place, and a bylaw which then indicates what it's supposed to do, and a charge from the select board that sets their goals, is specifically so that there would be a set of expertise around personnel matters that can be independent, citizen-oriented, and reflect the values. And that's much of what I was indicating in the statement that I made at the public hearing of those many months ago. I really recognize, too, that we are in a different time. Moving forward with this in this shape at this time, I think would be extremely ill-advised. My recommendation to the Select Board and to the Finance Committee is that this article should simply not be moved. It should be sent to those committees, both the Personnel Board and the Select Board, to determine what, in fact, we are looking for as a community. This bubbled up virtually at the last minute. It was nowhere to be seen until the January board personnel board meeting where it got my understanding is a short discussion, and then it appeared on the warrant. It's really not ready for prime time at all. And it does have the effect of essentially sidelining a committee, which was defined in the town charter. And so my suggestion to the finance committee is to recommend that to take a position that says at least either no action or no opinion. And in general, I would urge those people who think that they have an idea about how this board could run better, and I agree, it can run better, to get together and figure out something which actually meets needs. We're going to be facing really unique challenges in the near future. In terms of workforce and the ability to attract talented non-union workers and to manage that pool of talent well is extremely important. And we have a unique and exceptional resource in the citizens of this community that can help with that issue. And sidelining them and creating a board that just rubber stamps, the salary schedules is absolutely the wrong way to use citizens. I agree with that. It needs to be fixed, but this is not the fix. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Dee.
Just a technical question. Mark was saying that it's in the charter, the town charter, that a personnel board exists. Can a warrant article change the town charter?
The short answer to that is no. And this warrant article doesn't do that. This warrant article essentially takes a 14-page personnel bylaw and turns it into what you see on pages 7 and 8 of the article, which essentially takes a committee that has some specific responsibilities and turns them into a committee that has almost no responsibilities.
So it meets the requirement of the charter that it exists, but it will only meet at the pleasure, more or less, of the town manager when he asks it to meet. But it will at least continue to exist because it's required to exist, is what it sounds like. I think we've heard from 3 of our members, which to me, frankly, it's persuasive that this is outside of our purview. I'd be interested in hearing if there are voices who feel strongly that we should weigh in. And if I don't hear from anybody that we really need to weigh in, then we'll just move on to the next article.
Dean, I have a technical question. If we decide not to weigh in, that it's not in our purview to have an opinion, what would we actually recommend?
We don't have to move anything. We just, the same thing happened to us with those planning board articles.
Okay.
We heard a nice presentation and we said, thank you for your presentation, and did nothing.
Okay.
I don't think we have to do anything.
Okay.
Is there anybody who would like to do something? If so, you can make a motion. Hearing none. Okay, let's try it. Let's try for another article. So I think we'll take no opinion or something. Don't know how exactly I'm going to find that. Thank you for your comments, Mark.
Thank you for listening.
Yep.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, so back to our agenda here, or our list. The next one on our list is number 7, which is the COLA increase to the base, to the COLA base. Moving it up, that particular article moves the number up from 12,000 to 14,000 or something like that. We still have some outstanding information that we have not gotten back based on the minutes we just approved. So I would be inclined to skip over that one. Anybody want to dive in on that one? Seeing none. Okay. So I think the next one that we could legitimately talk about is 14, housing funds for housing development. This is $500,000 from free cash, number 14.
I move that we approve this article.
Second?
Second.
Okay. We have a second. Okay, discussion on this article. This is the second year this has come up. We are still pending from the State House on our request to be able to add taxes of various kinds. And so we still have to continue to try and prop up affordable housing funding. Mary, would you like to comment?
I just want to make some comments. Some of you remember I spoke against this last year, but I've come around because I feel that this is a temporary measure until we hopefully get two other pieces of legislature passed that will give us a more permanent funding for affordable housing. But I want to stress that I think this is a temporary measure. Free cash is never intended to be used for recurring expenses. This will be the second year. So I just want to go on the record of saying that I'll vote to approve this with the hope that we soon get another form of funding. I don't want this to become a permanent method of funding affordable housing. It should go through the regular budgetary process instead of, the circumventing the regular budgetary process and going directly to free cash.
Thank you. Chris?
So, Dean, I'm just worried about this one because of the uncertainty that we have, I guess, on using our reserves. And should we hold on it until we know a little bit more? We're going to run into this when we come to the middle school stabilization as well. So some of these things may be good uses of free cash, but I don't know how much free cash we're going to have. So that's my question on this. And I still have reservations on the, I personally don't think we should be using free cash for this. And I think the likelihood of us now predicting we're going to get somebody to raise taxes for this in the next couple of years. Now I think we're even a little more shaky on that. It may be longer that we're hitting into our own free cash before at the time the legislature gets around to give us, given what's going on or what's going to go on, I think, in the economy for the next couple of years. So I don't know. I feel less good about this one, but I'm just more concerned about it. It's how do we handle the free cash articles?
I think you have a good point, Christine, but I have a different question for the group, and that is, where within the context of the town's budget would this kind of appropriation fall if we were to say, you don't get to go into free cash to do this, please put it in the town's budget, allocate it somewhere. Where would that be at? Where would that be appropriated?
Probably under the town manager's budget. I can't think of any
budget
else.
Just create a line item called affordable housing support and just
something like that. Yeah.
And see if the town wants to do that as an ongoing thing. I don't know.
But I agree with what Mary said. I mean, I think this was always meant to be temporary, Mary, right? A year or two until the legislature did its thing.
Yes.
And I understand, Christine, if this is an ongoing thing, but our cash reserves are pretty high. And I think doing it this year, see what happens, and then if they do want something more, build it into the budget seems to be a good way to sort of balance all the interests.
Yeah, along that line, in the warrant article itself, it says transferring the funds to the Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And I think that's in the process of being developed. And until that is developed, the funding just sits. The money just sits someplace.
Yeah, that would go to the town for the town manager to expend at his discretion before if the municipal trust is not set up in a timely manner. So it would not be moved in that form. It would be moved with the alternative being the town manager's discretion in the event that it can't be put in the in that trust. So
okay.
Greg.
Coming at it from a bit of a different angle, if we do expect real estate prices potentially to go down, wouldn't it might be good for the housing authority to have this money so they could potentially purchase more affordable housing? Because that is one of Concord's goals, is to have the affordable housing. So this would really support that, actually.
That sort of goes to Dee's early point about how can we support, these different sorts of functions. And this is, certainly a way to do it. My thought is that, we're probably going to be several years out. It was already mentioned, but we're going to be several years out from when the legislature comes back around and says, oh yeah, we got to look at these, the local articles. And so we'll be in a sort of on a hamster wheel of approving them at town, of approving, sending it back to the legislature, and then waiting another year and sending it back for a few years probably at this point.
Right.
So maybe what we think about as a future strategy is, a time-based thing that's not unlike the way we did the drawdowns from the stabilization fund for the firefighters in the West Concord firehouse, which is that you don't take the full hit right up front, but you start to build it into your budget so that it, after a certain point, it's now in your budget.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
And then if you get these things from the legislature, then this thing can be around from the budget, but there's a slot already in the budget for these revenues.
Yeah. That's a good idea, Dean.
So, I don't know whether we try to get that to happen this year during our budget negotiations or what we do, but it's an idea about how to sort of feather it in rather than have to take a hit. But I tend to agree that I do not want to see individual, project-related dipping into the free cash. We're trying to use free cash as a way to buffer tax increases. And that's, so either we're putting $1 million on a specific article for tax relief, or putting stabilization money out of free cash aside for future tax relief. It's really, that's the fundamental use for free cash. It's not for project related things, in my view.
So. I guess I just want to, can I ask a question?
Yep.
All of that makes a lot of sense, but I just feel like I want to ask the question, and you guys, please, I want to test this and please push back. But I feel like this article feels like a discretionary item, if I can use that term loosely, in terms of it's a goal that the town has. And given the level of uncertainty, I tend to agree with Christine on this. There's so much uncertainty that's actually happening. And, if we are setting a precedent of using free cash for us, a goal that the town collectively has in a very precarious and fluid situation, is that the best use of our free cash, especially when if we anticipate that certain residents may have trouble paying their tax bills, why are we using free cash to pay for a nice to have?
It's a completely valid concern. I mean, but it depends on who you poll, how nice it is to have or how critical it is to have.
And that's completely fair. But I just feel like we need to ask ourselves that question.
Yep.
Andrea. Is the Junction Village project part of this discussion?
No, it is not.
Okay.
Discrete. Mr. Crane.
Thank you. And I'm sorry to keep jumping in here, but I think this started before I got here, obviously, but I think having it be discretionary, you use free cash because you have it and it's not needed for sometimes affordable housing projects come up and they are really one-time opportunities, even though you may spend it every year. There is such a thing as annually recurring one-time expenses. And so having some discretion with the funds means that if an opportunity comes along to create affordable housing units, and we're talking about maybe converting a single family to a 2-family, or purchasing a home and giving it to Habitat for Humanity, which is one in the works on Main Street. Having this this appropriation makes it easier to facilitate deals like that. And so it's not really, and if no deal comes along, then you don't spend it. But I'm just saying, I'm saying how I see it could be used and why in my estimation, why it exists, and why the operating budget may not necessarily be the right spot for it, because like I said, an affordable housing project is a one-time expense tied to that project, even if you did 10 affordable housing projects in the year.
Land purchases fall into the same category for open space. It's the exact same scenario. They're sort of one-time affairs. Parshar.
So if I remember correctly, if there's 500,000 available, properties come up, get bought, refurbished, and then sold, doesn't the money come? Where does the money go from the proceeds? Does it go to the trust, or does it come back?
Basically,
free cash?
Yeah, the way this works is you're basically buying something down.
Right.
You're buying it at some price, and then you're putting it back on the market, either with renovations or at a reduced price. And so this money, in effect, buys it down to an affordable level. So you don't get this money back, but there might be some churn in there where you're spending money and then getting money back out of the transaction. That's something that actually happens in the CHDC does stuff like that. It's a strategy that they have, is to buy down property in that way.
But I thought this was temporary until the trust funds get created and there's revenue in them.
Yeah, it's really not whether the trust funds are created. It's whether these other levies are permitted by the legislature and they're approved by town. So that
it rests in the town manager's budget now, because the eventual destination isn't currently structured.
Right.
And once that is structured, this annually recurring effort will then go to the housing trust.
Right.
But when you say it's in your budget, you mean you have the right to spend it.
It is town manager discretion at this time. But I think, it's town manager discretion, but I'll say that it's been clear to me since the day I got here that it's the town manager's discretion to work with the Concord Housing Trust on figuring out the best way to spend it. So
yeah.
Fair enough. I have some sentiment here that even on this $500,000, and this may trickle over to the middle school stabilization fund, that we may be premature in discussing, coming up with a final recommendation at this time. Is there some sentiment that we should, dive in? I'm happy to hear a motion, and we can discuss and move it if we,
I will. How do I get out of my motion? I think you raise a good point that perhaps we should not be voting on this tonight, that we should maybe take a breath.
You could move to withdraw your motion, I believe, Dee.
Then I move to withdraw my motion.
Yeah, so Dean, I move to table this.
Table it, okay.
And leave it till we know what the status of the...
So we're going to lay that on the table. Is that the motion that I think is probably the Robert's Rules appropriate motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
Second.
Need a second?
Okay. So I'm going to take a vote on tabling this motion. Phil, the mover, how do you vote?
Oh, yes.
Okay. I'm Dean, and I vote yes. Chris, we're voting on to table this. Yes.
I'm sorry. I was on mute. Yes.
Greg.
Yes.
Mary.
Yes.
Parshar.
What's a yes vote mean? That means we're
yes
just
means that we will table the discussion of what we're going to do about this. We're going to table Dee's motion.
Yes.
No, we're tabling the article.
We're tabling.
Yeah. Dee withdrawn her motion. I'm saying that we should table the discussion of
the article
until at some other point, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
Dee.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
John, are you in a seance out there? What's going on there?
It's nighttime in the Bahamas too. Yeah.
Are you a yes? I'm sorry.
Yes.
You're a yes. All right, Dick.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Andrea.
Yes.
Wade.
Yes.
Okay, Peter.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to table that one. So, okay, what else can we work on here? Well, we're running out of time anyway, so let's see what we have. Not much. We can start the community preservation article. Now, these funds are basically available. I don't think there's any reason for us to, be putting this down because the money's not there. This money has been collected, I think, and has been allocated. It's appropriate.
Which one are we working on?
44.
PPC.
44.
Sorry, I'll put that back on the screen. Hold on. There you go. So we're working on 44, the community preservation appropriation recommendation. Now this is a multi-part proposal. There's a possibility that we could vote affirmative action on a certain number of them and then dive into debating on the ones that were a little more contentious. Does that have any play here with the group?
Yes.
Yes.
I agree.
Okay. All right, let me, if you have your warrant, I don't have this in a typed form that I could share on the screen, sorry to say, but I can read them out. We have a community, they're labeled A through J. There's $300,000 for community housing for the housing authority.
Hey, Dean, do you want me to share the warrant?
Yeah, you could probably do that. That'd be fine. Yep.
There you go.
There you go. Perfect.
Thank you.
I didn't have a soft copy. I have my hard copy here. Yeah. So there you've got A, B. The two that were contentious were C and D.
Mm-hmm.
The Buttrick House, parts. Excuse me. Yep. Oh, okay. Town of the Giroux Park improvements. I think that probably warrants some discussion in the dredging project.
I agree. Both F and G.
Assabet River Bridge construction drawings, just $250,000 to draw to make some drawings. The Minuteman Arc Disabilities Playground and the staff and technical support. So I think if we go back to the top, A, B, E, H, and then the two H, I, and J are probably limited. We have limited conversation about that. I don't think there were any questions raised about any of those. Can we get a motion for affirmative action on A, B, E, I, J, H, I, J.
H, I, J. So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion of that grouping this is a subset of this article? No discussion. I'm going to take, can you drop your share so I can see everybody's faces and do a roll call, please? Okay. So this is for affirmative action on the subset that was mentioned of the community preservation article number 44. Phil.
You're muted, Phil.
Sorry. Approve.
It's Dean and I approve, or I vote yes. Chris?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Parashar?
Yes.
Dee?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Andrea?
Yes.
Wade?
Yes.
Peter?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, wait, you forgot Dick and Tom.
Yeah.
Where did Dick go?
I don't get a vote.
Forgot Dick and Tom.
Where are they? Oh, there's Tom. Tom
Yes.
and Dick.
Yes.
You guys skip by. I get skipped by you somehow. Okay. And you're both yes. Okay. So for that grouping, we have affirmative action. And now we can discuss the rest of the group. Let's start with, where should we start? Let's start with the two that have a religious implication, C and D.
So, Dean, in our last meeting, I think I expressed some concern about the potential for litigation that those two represented, and so that I remain concerned about that.
So that's really like risk management that you're concerned about, John. Is it? It's not that you have like a moral objection, but your concern is that someone else that will cost the town money to defend once we've gone forward with this.
Correct. And I think if you recall, we asked Mr. Kratzley if the CPC would agree to foot the legal bills if that were the case. And that's a lot to ask. And well, I remain concerned about those two.
Okay. D.
Yeah. With regards to the steeple on the church, I think that the argument that they presented was compelling, that it had been a town structure and that it still serves that purpose, the same purpose. So I think that one is fine. In terms of the roof, my comparison would be the Masonic Temple. When I was on the CPC, it's like, okay, it isn't really a church, but it certainly has, implications around it. And the work that we had that was presented to us was how they repatched the bricking on the exterior. Right. So, and it's a historic building. It's on a historic block. I think the same argument is justified with replacing the roof with the same quality of materials, etc., because it is a historic building and it's in a historic location. So I don't think that there would be any. It's not the same case as the case in Acton at all. There's no religious component to either of these two requests that have been put in. I know the first time it came up, somebody was talking about the painting of the doors and they had a cross on them, but that was not discussed at the last time that we heard this.
Chris.
I agree with Dee's comments. So I did have concerns earlier. I thought that they were pretty well addressed at the last discussion we had on this. And so I'm okay with it now.
Mary?
Me too.
I tend to feel the same way. I think that the argument for the clock is quite sound, that the only distinction that was made is that they literally, because it was a town clock, they literally had separate electric service that the town paid for. It was, there's a good, historical record of the town managing that and maintaining that clock. So I think that one's very tight. The parish hall is been, turned from a rectory into a more functional meeting space. So I think it's got less of a religious characteristic, although it's owned by a religious organization. So it still has some, taint, but it's not for a religious purpose. It's for fixing a roof. I'm okay with both. I am okay with both.
Can I just make another comment, please? Sure. Thank you. I was the observer to this committee, and as I've said before, these people do excellent work, and Dee knows because she was the chair of that committee. I mean, they vet these things thoroughly. They do on-site visits. So I'm inclined to just go with what they recommend. I don't feel that way with the $1 million that they're asking to spend for projects because economics has changed. But as far as their recommendations for these two, based on the merits of the project, not the cost, then I'm willing to go with what they've recommended to us and not second guess their work.
Okay. Greg.
What was the final in the? Wasn't there 2 crosses on the doors? Was it final that wasn't playing into the? And just a quick response is fine to that.
Yes, because they were going to paint the doors, but the painting wasn't part of what they were talking about at the last meeting at all.
Okay, and then John, I'd be curious to see why everybody else seems to be pretty in favor of this. What big legal argument do you see? Just the fact that it is a religious.
Well, yes, I'm not a lawyer, but using the Acton analogy, there's potential for someone else to see it as a religious issue, and
so it's just comparing it to that case.
Well, and to ask town council and to hear from legal counsel, I'll defer to Phil on this one, but that's a little bit like asking a barber if you need a haircut, right? That it's.
But the case in
I also
Acton.
feel let me just finish, please.
Okay.
I also feel that we've been through a 10-year period where there's been a fair amount of money chasing, in my opinion, on occasion, not quite as many good ideas. And I think the world has changed. And I think the sooner we start addressing that, the better. And so I'm going to start now.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone else care to comment on these 2 articles? Parshar.
So not less on these 2 and just a question. If the money doesn't get spent out of this fund, can it go anywhere else for other purposes?
No.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Well, there are 4 purposes here. And if they were to decide not to, to rescind certain A through J, those funds might have to be put aside in targeted bank accounts that could only be used for a certain purpose, because they need to maintain a balance between the various purposes that the CPC is required to spend against. Now, they have to spend 10% on open space and on historic preservation, et cetera, and affordable housing. But those things are going to be met even if they were to rescind these 2 articles. They would still meet those requirements.
Well, I was looking at that, and I'm not exactly sure. It would be close, but you'd be reducing the entire amount anyway.
But you could still you just put the funds into a bank account that is targeted for historic preservation. And
that's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So
it would come out of the budget.
Yeah.
And be directed into that account.
Right. That's right.
Can I make a motion?
You may.
I move that we vote to recommend positive action. Wait, what is the right word? That we include both C and D in our recommendation for Article 44.
Second.
Okay. We had a second there? I thought I saw Chris's hand go up for a second.
Yeah, I seconded it.
Okay. So we're going to go around. Phil?
I agree. I vote yes, but I just want to say I don't think there's much likelihood of litigation. There was the litigation in Acton, but I think that was a unique situation, and I think there is I think a lot of law that says you can't deny a grant just because a party is a religious organization. It could be complicated, but I don't think this qualifies for that sort of analysis.
Okay. Dean, and I vote yes. Chris?
Yes.
Greg?
Yes.
Mary?
Yes.
Parshar?
Yes.
Dee?
Yes.
Ryan? You're muted.
You're muted.
Yes.
John?
No.
Okay. Dick?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
Andrea?
I'll vote yes. I have reservations, but
you only have 2 choices, yes or no.
okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Wade?
Yes.
Okay. We have
Peter.
Yes.
Oh, Peter. Peter's not, no picture. Peter?
Incognito, yes.
Yes, okay.
No picture, Peter.
Yeah, it's fine. It's all good. Okay. All right, so now we're down to, okay, now we have to really tussle a little. Let's see how our time is. I think, put this down because we've hit the 9 o'clock hour. We've passed the 9 o'clock hour. Do you think we can get through these next two components of this quickly? I want to get us out of here by 9:30, and I want to spend some time strategizing on our next set of meetings and how we want to proceed. I'd be inclined to sort of pause this right where we are. These are not going to be trivial conversations about how, because they dovetail with capital and other things, and I feel like it's going to take us a minute to straighten that out. So I'm going to recommend that we move on to the next item on our agenda, and that is to come up with a slate of meetings with a strategic plan for how we want to approach our work as we go forward. Now, just to put a little structure on it, and there isn't a lot, we're kind of in a hurry up and wait mode, which is that at the point at which the town meeting is declared to be, okay, we're going to have a total of 30 days of notice, and that'll be it. And we're going to have to produce our recommendations, which we've made a lot of progress on and we can make more progress on, but the real meat of our recommendations, we've skipped over. So we will need to very quickly pull together our recommendations, publish them in a report. That report can be, I've asked the select board, what kind of latitude do we have about publication? I would recommend that we publish it as an online document and everybody gets a postcard in the mail. This is your FinCom report, HTTP, go to this website, here's the FinCom report. But if you come to town meeting 2 weeks later, we will have printed copies that you can work with at the meeting. So I think we can cut our schedule for printing and publication of the report pretty tight. I'm not sure it's going to fly, but I think we can. But nonetheless, 30 days is not a lot of time once we are told by the moderator, okay, go. So how do we get ourselves to a position where we are kind of ready to go? And what sort of meetings do we want to have? I can think of one that I would like to have Tim Holt and Dawn Goriello come in and talk to us about the middle school. I want to hear about it. There's nothing on the warrant this year that has anything to do with the middle school, but it is something that is a major, looming need for the community, and we just like to hear from them. There's been some significant action on that today, and anybody need a quick update on what's happened with that? Yes, no, yes, okay, a couple of hands in the air. That was a contracted thing that was supposed to do two components, a feasibility study and then a schematic design once they came up with a preliminary design. They are pausing between the feasibility study and the schematic design because they can't finalize the feasibility study outcome without further public input, and they don't have any way to get that. It's just not feasible in the current scenario. There's also a lot of financial uncertainty, and so they're putting that down. So they've paused their process between those two phases. They were hoping to push towards a September a special town meeting, and they're now anticipating that they will bring a design to town meeting in April of 2021. So it's pretty much pushed the whole thing out about 6 months, 7 months, just by doing that. Which means that the schools will have to go through another school year probably with the buildings that they have. It's a big deal. And I think we should have them in and talk about, we were going to have them in and have a conversation, and that just never happened. Mary.
Dean, I'm wondering, you're right. I think we need to talk to them. But since there's not going to be anything on this September, or July, August, or September's town meeting relative to the middle school, except for the stabilization fund, I wonder if we should concentrate our time on things that we're going to be talking about at this town meeting and have them in after that. I'm wondering why we need to talk to them.
Well, I think right now, everything seems very premature for us. Stephen has been pretty upfront with us that this is a very unstable time, and it's things that we talk about in the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks are unlikely to be productive because there's not that much known. So I don't know. This is more of a gap filler. Like, let's meet, let's talk to them, let's see where they ended up, let's get a report from them. And we need to rest, that's kind of why I suggested that, is that we're not really in a position to do very much productive right at the moment.
That's right.
It's hard for us.
Okay.
So Dean?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I can speak as a member of the building committee.
Yeah.
And I will say that when Greg raised his hand saying, did anybody need to be updated on what happened today? I didn't find that to be credible. I'm sure he knows what's happening.
That's not why I raised my hand. I was raising my hand to propose an answer to one of Dean's questions that he did there. It was not an update.
I just saw that happen. I'm like, no, although I will say, for the Stranger Things fans, you do have the upside down background going there. And so I thought maybe you're in the upside down.
Upside down background?
Yeah, from the movie, the Netflix show, forget Stranger Things, whatever.
I got 2 kids. I don't watch TV.
So I'll just say
we heard them this morning.
Somebody said they loved hearing them because they're going to be in the school.
Yes, they are.
Right.
Yeah. What I did
they're regulars on the meetings. And God bless Dawn. She's a pro at handling that. Anyway, I'm sorry. So just going back to the middle school. So I think there was a pretty detailed statement on the committee's position that was submitted to the select board. It was in the packet. I think before the board decides to have us sit down, I would encourage, the committee, before the finance committee decides to call in, Dr. Hunter and the co-chairs of the building committee, I would encourage all of you to take a look at that statement. I think it speaks for itself. It could probably answer a lot of questions you may have. But I will say, there's a few other steps that need to be done to get us to that check mark, that feasibility study. So there's a little bit more work that's going to unfold, but only to get to that point that we have all agreed that the pause needs to happen at. And I think in discussion both this morning at the middle school building committee meeting and briefly at the select board meeting, it was really the decision to unpause is really going to need to be based on data that we don't have yet. State budgets, I think the August 1st collection, property tax collections. Carrie mentioned the local receipts for February, March, and April. There are certain benchmark indices that we need to know before we know the really not to know about whether or not we need a middle school. I think that's already established. It's really, what does the impact of COVID-19 on our local economy look like? And as we talked earlier, we won't know the full answer probably for at least a year. But in terms of revenues and ability to pay, we'll know a lot more in September. So that was the nature of that discussion. So I think, and I guess I would tie it to my earlier comments about guidelines. Until we have that data, it's hard to have a meaningful discussion about what the future is for the project.
Stephen, I was really just recommending that we have the 2 chairs come in and just give us a report, like give us a status of where it's been paused. Where are we now that it's been paused? What's the scope of what's being anticipated? What's the cost as it was identified in the, just so that the committee can have start a conversation with that building committee, so that our views are shared. That's all. We had hoped to do this way back, and it just kept getting kicked farther and farther down the road because some financials weren't prepared yet, and then Tim had a surgery, and it just kept going out. We just want to have a very basic conversation in which we are, we're having a little mind meld. Hi, this is the finance committee. We have certain expectations that you'll be looking very closely at what these impacts are going to be to our residents, as well as the future benefits to the school system. So it's just a very general thing that we've wanted to have, and we've been sort of short-circuited for some months now. So I think it's a status. Yeah, Greg.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think if we do want to have that conversation, that's probably one that we should have sooner, so that we don't hit into what you described earlier. Once we get the notification for town meeting that we have 30 days to go, right? So like in the next 2 weeks, we probably don't have too much. And if we wanted to get that ball rolling, I don't think we have a lot to discuss with them about, it's paused and everything, but this should be looking at the 3 to 5 year, what it's going to cost the town. And I think that's what you want out of this, correct?
It's kind of the way, we just, way back, we had these big mountain charts that were being built that, showed somewhere in the, 7 to 10% tax increases. These are not tax increases that we think we could anticipate, putting on top of our citizens anytime soon. It's going to take some deep breathing to get to those. So it's or some creative accounting. I don't know how we're going to do it, but we just need to get a status. It's really so. What do we say in the next, say, 2 weeks? We meet again, and we ask the middle school building committee co-chairs to give us a presentation on the status. With a basic financial bent to it. I know that there's going to be an educational framework that the schools would love to support, but we're fundamentally worried about how much is it going to cost, and can we afford it? So that's our goal. So I'd say we try that in 2 weeks, and we're gonna start. We're just gonna keep our eye on what's going on. Other committees are starting to fire back up again, and I'm sort of saddled with being the chair. I should be out of this. I shouldn't be the chair anymore. But we need to get into our growth rate conversations that are typically done in the middle of the summer. Yes.
Can I ask a question? Dean, do you think we have a chance of getting any forgiveness on that 5-year tax projection, given all of the uncertainty that we're living under right now? Have you looked into that at all?
I haven't even. I don't know. That's a great question. Mary and I have shared models that run 10,000 iterations and come up with.
We don't do a good job of this in the best of times, because it's not our fault. It's not a modeling. It's just that we vote things at town meeting that add to the tax levy that we don't know about when we're doing the modeling. So I just feel like this would be an opportune time to ask for some forgiveness, as far as not having to go through this exercise of projecting something that we know is not accurate.
Yeah, I can talk to the moderator about that.
Okay, good.
We're up against some legal language that was passed by town meeting that we're supposed to do something. So,
but I think there's a lot of latitude on what we have to do.
No, I hear you. No, I think that's.
So you'll do that.
The other thing is that there's no responsibility to get it correct. So you could have a bad.
It hasn't stopped the people who've been
5 numbers on
these debts. 1 minute it's 250,000, next minute it's 8,000.
Have a wide band, and you're all set. And you're good to go.
I know. We could just not even try to do a good job. Just put 5 numbers on a piece of paper.
Yeah. Here's our
so going back to what you were suggesting.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea, and I'm not sure, but I think it might have been Dr. Hunter that just made the off comment that they don't even know what kind of learning, what form or platform learning is going to take in the future. How long we're going to be online, but it may, the whole building may change. The needs of the students and the teachers may change. We just don't know. But I do think it's a good idea to hear from these two at this point. Like Greg said, we're gonna be under the gun a little later, so maybe just a quick meeting.
Okay.
See where they are.
Thanks. Dee?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of uncertainty, obviously. So one of the things we could do, though, is to indicate to both the town manager and school superintendent that when we know when town meeting is going to be, we need to see them 5 weeks before that event.
Right.
So that, we need to schedule them to come in so that we can have numbers, and that those are the best numbers we're going to be able to work with.
Yep.
And the only way we could do it, we could have them come in to talk about that. We don't have to take a vote until actually town meeting. And so maybe some of those numbers could change, but we have to have a sense of where they're heading, because there are implications in terms of some of the other articles here that we have to
Can you clarify? Are you talking about the middle school right now?
No.
I'm talking
we're on the topic of the middle school, right?
Sorry. I'm on budgets.
Okay.
I thought
I'm like, why do we have to have them back in that quickly?
Oh yeah,
we don't have to have them in for budgets quickly. I think we have to have them in 5 weeks before town meeting.
And okay, good.
For the school budgets, not for
the
the middle
school budgets and even the town budget.
Just want a clarification.
Yeah.
So do you envision at that time that I like that, moving back from the due date. So at 5 weeks, would they come in with their proposed budget and we would issue a guideline, or what's the process?
Well, we have to have a guideline for them, right?
Well, we can't have a guideline if we talk to them. You see, it's an iterative process. So, you know what I mean?
We already went through an iterative process. Isn't it now going to be, we have to cut down X amount? So if it's 2.86, I think that's Carrie's number. If it's 2.86 that we have to find money for, then we have to find that now.
Well,
right?
Is that what we want to do? Do we want to say we want the property tax increase to be X and then back into a number that we give to the school committee and the town? Or do we want to do what we usually do, which is we talk to them first, we listen to what they have to say, and then we talk with Carrie and say, based on what they're saying, that's where we do the coming together part. So I'm
Can I?
Brian, go ahead.
Both sides have merit here, but I really feel like I tend to agree with what Stephen was talking about. We're kind of like guessing at a bunch of this stuff, and it would be really helpful. What I'm really kind of hoping for is that the moderator would be able to give us some guidance around September, and then we can sort of work backwards from there, as opposed to trying to spin our wheels of doing a bunch of work on the front end and then have to come back and then do it again at the last minute because we've...
No, I don't think our goal is to do a lot of work on the front end. The sentiment I'm hearing is we pretty much just kind of chill for a while until we have a fairly definitive town meeting date that we can then work towards, and then we dig in and
then we backfill it.
We back up. Yeah.
So, to Mary's point, I think we need to recraft and completely redo an actual guideline, and whether that's done with a heavy consultation with the budgeting entities or a lighter one, we still need to do our work to revise it. The guideline that's standing now is not meaningful, and so we need to, and as are the budgets that are standing now, are probably not entirely meaningful.
Dean, can I make a
But
suggestion?
Dean, all that happened was revenue dropped, right? So,
Yeah.
right, that's all that happened, right? They'll come back and tell us what they think it is. So maybe it's 2 to 4% drop in revenue. That's all that's happened, right? So it does have an implication for the tax rate, but I don't see why we have to redo the whole process for that, right?
Yeah.
That's a little bit of math. And then we can look at what the math tells us. In fact, we could start doing that now. If you wanted to say, what if it's 2, what if it's 4, or you can wait. But it's just going to be math, right? I don't see us reallocating across
Chris, we
all
did
the
some of
budget
this math.
articles.
I just want to talk for a minute. We did some of this math, and if the spending level stays at the guideline numbers that we put out before, and these revenue dropouts fall out, the taxes will go up by over 6%, 6 and 6.38.
Right.
That's the math. So we probably ought to be issuing a different number as a guideline because
moving line to 6. I mean, I don't know what else you're going to do, right? We're not going to generate, right?
No, but
if the school's going to come back and say, do you see they're going to come back and say we're going to drop expenses by 3%? I don't think so.
Well, all right, Parashar.
So again, I'm sort of with Christine, but I'd like to do it in a little bit of a collaborative manner. So I guess the notion is we've put out guidelines based on the revenue projections. We're going to be short 2%, 3% for it's unknown. But I'm curious whether we can pose a question to both town manager and the school that says, look, in effect, can you give us a or plan for a scenario with a 5% decrease, a 2% decrease, something like that, number one, but also ask them, and maybe Stephen can answer this question now, is, at what point would you feel comfortable enough coming back to the FinCom with a couple different scenarios, maybe 2, high and low drop, of what you would recommend for next year, so that it be done well in advance so that we can turn around and give a little bit of input so that they can go back and have something ready for sort of final input from us or final buy-in. Does that make sense?
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. It makes sense as a question, but the finance committee doesn't write the budget. And so while I think I value, I'll speak for myself, I know Carrie feels the same. We value your input. We do. But we have to figure out what the data is and balance it out and write it. And can I just, and I'm going to do, if you'll just me for a minute, Mr. Chairman, for a bit of a PSA, because honestly, the need for people to try and get back to normalcy and manage the anxiety of the situation we're in is pronounced. And I get emails every single day from residents that reflect that, it's not about, the emails aren't about nervousness or uncertainty or anxiety. They're complaining about people not wearing masks or the tennis courts not being open. And so the idea that if we can just get back to our normal routine on the budget, maybe, I don't want to project, but to me, it seems like let's get back to something normal that we're used to for town meeting. But what I'm suggesting is everything is up. It is truly an unprecedented time. And so like business as usual in all these processes needs to be rethought or just let it go for the year. I mean, to some extent, the finance committee has checked all of the boxes for its obligations for town meeting. It's not your fault that the world turned upside down in between the time you did all this stuff and printed the warrant. So what I'm saying is we just have to not think about this process in the terms that we normally think about it. I know I'm not, because we're trying to track moving parts every single day. And so I think in terms of like what the budget is going to look like that we think we're going to have in the motion at town meeting, I don't think we'll know that until August at best. And so to say 5 weeks ahead of town meeting, I hope we have all the information 5 weeks ahead of town meeting. I truly do. Most of that's not up to us. Or I shouldn't say, most of the variables, the revenue drops and things like that, especially with state aid, aren't going to be within our control. And so I hope we do get them, but we may not. And in terms of like projections of cuts and things like that, that really casts a pall over the town organization, because people start sweating their positions, their programs, the things that are values to the community. And I don't like getting into that in kind of a setting like this. I think what I would say is your guidelines have a percentage, but that percentage is really demonstrative of a philosophy and an approach. Okay, the 2.5% is a statement by the Finance Committee that we don't want taxes to go up 5, 6, 7% in normal times. Carrie and I think, embraced that message and delivered you a budget that does that met the number, and I think also acknowledged the concept, the principle. As we go forward and create the new normal FY21 budget, we're going to be mindful of that philosophy, even if we don't know what that number is going to be. And so I guess trust us a little bit to know that we know what you're going to want to see, and we know that making sure that we're not just throwing money at problems or filling holes with reserves or any of these other things are going to be how we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it in a way that we know that all of you want to see it fixed, because we went through that whole guidelines process, and I learned what was important to the Finance Committee.
So let me respond to that. I do not want this process to become adversarial. This has been a collaborative process ever since I've been on the committee, and this is my 4th year. And I think it's been like that for many years. There have been different kinds of, divisiveness that have occurred in other areas, but the Finance Committee has tried through this guidelines method to, show some give and take, to understand the needs, to weigh the capacity of the town. And that's a role that we play. And to just say, well, we're just going to do it the new way. It's our thing. We're going to do it. Don't worry. We have a role, and we would like to continue in that collaboration. So, we're just trying to find our way forward, and we're all going to have to figure out what that new way is. But I think there's still a role, and the Finance Committee is going to have to figure out what its new role is, because we fully expect to be here for the citizens and to make recommendations to the town for town meeting as to whether or not we feel that what's being presented is something we can live with. So that's our mandate. So we hope to do that in a collaborative way, not just have it put on the desk and said, well, this is what it is. We're the professionals here. We're the Finance Committee here. So let's try to stay in that way as a team and see how we can work together. That's my message.
If my message was in contrast to that, I apologize for not communicating clearly. I guess what I'm saying is, in the process, the town manager writes the budget and gives it to the Finance Committee and the Select Board. And basically that's going to happen again.
With some feedback from the Finance Committee about the guideline. In other words, what ends up being done involves a collaboration that involves a guideline. And our guideline is now way out of whack, as will the budget be way out of whack. So we have to collaborate to get to a new plateau. It's just that simple. I don't think this is complicated. So, but I think it's premature. I agree with you, Stephen, that it's premature. And that for us to, be diving into a whole series of meetings right now is probably, not that productive. But we have to be ready to move quickly in the event that, 30 day, we get the final 30 days, we're going to do it this month or whatever that happens. We have to be ready. So that's all. So for now, I guess we don't really have a tremendous strategy other than that we'll try to come up with a calendar driven back up 5 weeks or 6 weeks. These are the meetings we'd have to get through our process of just having recommendations, approving or voting no action, and being ready for town meeting. So I suspect we're probably, we're going to have a limited amount of work to do for the next probably 2 months. Doesn't sound like we're going to be doing very much for 2 months. I think we should get a report from the school building committee, just so that we know what that is. But other than that, I don't have anything huge that I think we really need to be doing. Anybody else got any other opinions?
I would just like to add that we also need to hear from the schools. I mean, it's nice. It's very reassuring to know. And I believe I don't want to be asking for a whole bunch of data that changes every week. That would be just, nobody's asking for that. And we don't want to just have meetings to have meetings. And I do appreciate what Stephen and Carrie are doing as far as trying to get a budget that's reasonable. But the schools, as we know, are big spenders, and we need to get them into the conversation as well. So I think we need to be talking to them. Again, it's too soon to talk to them about the budget. I think expenses are going to change. To Chris's point earlier, it's not just the revenue that's changing. I think there's going to be some spending that might change because of the new way we educate. I don't know yet. But so I think we need to have a conversation with them as well. Again, it's too soon, but once we get a better feel for when town meeting is going to happen, we need to talk to them about what they see for the budget for FY20.
Can I make a suggestion? So if we can get the middle school committee, say in the next 2 weeks from now, to focus on that, would put us to the end of May, early June.
Yep.
Would it make sense to have another finance committee meeting after the fiscal year closes, first or second week in July, which would give us some time to get an update from Carrie and Stephen as to where they think revenue fell. Also, maybe an update on, hey, where do we think revenue's heading, so that we can be a little bit more better prepared for an eventual meeting. It sounds like might occur in August with the schools and with the town, either right before or right after a preliminary sort of budget is put together. So at least map out the next 2 meetings.
I think at least we can go 2 meetings. I think we can have, I think we can have one. We can have one. I think there's at least a week and a half, there's at least 2 weeks of work before the feasibility preliminary report is finalized. That sounds weird, like the preliminary report finalized, but that's not all the I's haven't been dotted yet on that. It's not a full feasibility report because they need there's a public input section that will get them a certain amount of additional decision making done. But when that's done, and I think that's probably in the 2-week time frame, we should be able to have a nice conversation. So I'll consult with the chair there, Tim, or Greg. You can ask your wife when she might be free in the next couple of weeks, whatever. But I think in the next couple of weeks, we could have them in and we could have them give a presentation on the puts and takes and the financial.
And even if the report's not done, I go back to what Greg said, and, we talked about this in January. It's just a preliminary, nice to meet you, let's work together, collaborative spirit, which frankly, we're going to need now more than we did back in February.
Yep.
So, I'm sorry. I think the timing of that Prashar's suggestion will hopefully line up with the governor or the state re-releasing their budget. And I think that would be an excellent time to get back together to see what those numbers look like.
Okay.
So is it possible, and this goes to the chair, but also to Stephen, is it possible, given that there's so much uncertainty and we really don't know when the governor is going to make an announcement, is it possible to be calling an audible as opposed to just making up a date for a meeting?
We only need 2 days of notice to post a meeting under open.
So if Stephen and Carrie actually get some real intel,
very short notice. Yeah.
If they get some actual intel that allows them to provide an informed perspective, they get the information and then they're like, okay, set up a meeting. We could be doing it the following week as opposed to just putting something random on the calendar. Just because we end up in a June 30 close doesn't mean we're going to get any new information just because it's the close.
So for now, we seem to have kind of an open calendar. And why don't I do this? I'll put down, here are the meetings that I think we need to conduct. And we can plug in something that looks like week 1, we have these people, in week 2, we have it. And we may have to conduct them in kind of a high speed mode where we're saying we're meeting 1 or 2 times in a given week. Usually it's like each week we have a new somebody in and we go another week and we have somebody in, and that takes a month to get all the different entities to come in and talk to us. We could meet every other day if we needed to just kind of accelerate that and make it. I'll try to come up with, here are the meetings we need to conduct in order to get through the process, and in this accelerated fashion, so that we understand what the budgets are. We have the understanding to make recommendations, et cetera. I mean, it's interesting. We've held all these hearings, but the hearings are now fundamentally in the rearview mirror and meaningless, compared to what's ultimately going to be. So we have something on our shoulders, which is to represent the town when the town's public hearings didn't turn out to be that useful to the town. So we're going to have to, do the best we can as the town's representatives to do this. So to vet these things and make our recommendations. Because they're not going to have there aren't going to be another round of hearings. That's not happening probably.
Hey, Dean, are there other deliverables that we have that we can be working on? So we have some more warrant articles to go through, right? So we have some others that we haven't yet hit.
Let me look at my list here. What we have skipped the town. Let's see, we've skipped the town budget, the capital budgets, housing development. We still have a little left to go because of the capital components of the community preservation. Minuteman Regional, public schools capital, regional high school, and regional high school capital.
And the TIF.
And the TIF, right.
And the TIF.
These are all the meat potatoes.
The regional high school, the regional.
Moving their capital. That's
right.
Yeah, they're not moving their capital.
Number 28.
Yep.
Right. We still have the TIF too.
The TIF.
Or 29, whatever.
Remember that one?
We didn't talk about this, did we?
29.
No, we never did.
My list. I'm sorry, my list is incomplete. We didn't talk about the TIF.
Right. So okay. we have things to do there. And then secondly, on our report, so can we sign off on elements of the report ahead of time? I think we should be doing everything we can so we are ready to go, and then we'll save the time for when we actually have more data to deal with on town budgets and school budgets, but get everything done as quick as possible. Because I assume at some point people are going to go on vacation. In August, we usually do nothing.
Nothing, I know.
So now if we have a whole lot of important meetings in August, no one's going to be here, right? So we got to think about
that. Carrie's produced a very nice draft of the FinCom report, but all the numbers in it are the budgets from back in the day. All the observer pieces that you folks submitted were added as good. And there are some chunks that need to be rewritten. The schools piece is now blown out of the water, needs to be written. But there's a very nice draft that has been created as a framework, but it is pretty meaningless as it stands because a lot of it's going to just not be that informative. Yes, Dee.
I think one of the components that would help our town citizens better understand what's happening as a result of this pandemic would be to have a section in both the school write-up and in the town write-up in terms of what are the changes that have been implemented in the way that they do business, and whether town business, if people working from home, what changes have they made, and the ramifications of those changes in terms of the budget or the implications. And then also on the school side, because I remember Lori saying that with the teachers working at home, they're not taking days off, and she has cut back on every single one of the substitute teachers.
Right.
So that's a big shift, and that's a cost shift as well. So I think that we need to have that aspect of what changes have occurred in your environment to do your work based on what's happened out in because of the COVID virus.
Those are very good ideas, Dee, for incorporating into the report. No question, those are good ideas.
Okay.
You know, that everything's going to be colored by how has COVID affected, you know, the piece we're talking about. Well, we've blown way past my 9:30. Tom's got his thumbs up, the former chair. I will. I'll send around a proposed list of meetings that would be helpful, and then Carrie would suggest that we need a meeting by June 24th because typically we have to approve transfers and do things like that. So we will need a meeting at just before the end of the fiscal, so that she can manipulate accounts and stuff. Although we have not approved the motion to move money to support the legal fund. So I don't know. Carrie, can you just give us some feedback about that? Like if this fiscal year isn't really closing on the 30th and we're just going to drift into the month-to-month mode, is it really closed or what are we doing?
The fiscal year is absolutely closing on June 30.
Okay.
And we have to have processed all year-end transfers by July 15.
Okay. All right. So does that put us in a box relative to article, whatever that was?
Yes. Yes, it does. And so the transfer will have to be made.
I'm not an accountant, but my understanding of the way that the legislation was written for the month-to-month mode was that you're really extending the 20 fiscal year. That from a financial perspective, it's actually an extension of the 20 fiscal. And
you're only using the FY20 numbers to calculate your 1/12 budget. The fiscal year closes on June 30th and the new one starts on July 1st.
So how is it that the way the legislation reads, you are going into deficit spending? I just don't know. I guess I'll have to reread it. I was under the impression from a legal perspective, you're literally extending the FY20 year, and I could be wrong.
Dean, I think they characterize it as deficit spending because you have no new appropriation.
Oh.
So does that mean you don't have the capacity to actually levy a tax?
No. Or that's.
I don't understand how it's a deficit.
Dean, taxes get collected. The legislative branch makes the appropriations. The legislative branch will not have made the appropriations for FY21 by the end of the fiscal year, and that's why they allow you this emergency deficit spending provision, because I think they understood when they passed the legislation, it's likely packing 300 or 400 people into a gym wasn't going to be good for the spread of coronavirus, even into before June 30th. And that's why they did that. It was about preventing the spread of a disease.
Okay. I mean, okay, I'm fine. So basically this article that has to do with an FY20 appropriation for backdating, our legal expenses becomes moot, correct?
Well, we have to do the interfund transfers for legal expenses and potentially other things. Carrie and I we're working on putting that all together. I'll give you an example. Our public health nurses are normally part-time. As you might imagine, they are like triple time. Like they're working overtime right now because they have been the front end of the contract tracing efforts locally. And so there may be other areas that need interfund transfers from departments that have not seen as the same rate of expenditure. So my plan is to do it, my plan is to present a package that is comprehensive as far as we know for interfund transfers before the June 15th, before the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah.
We can do it on time.
Don't worry, we'll have a meeting in there that can take care of that business. It's not a problem, Stephen. We'll take.
No, and listen, you guys are super accommodating, and I appreciate that. It was more. This is one of those things that has been impacted by the pandemic, and so I just want to clarify why we're kind of putting this all together. This is when I say business as usual is not really there. This is sort of an abnormal thing at the level I think we're talking about.
Well, it's sort of it's really truncating the conversation around Article 9 there, because you're going to end up with a transfer that we're going to have to approve, and so as a select board, in order to get it into the fiscal year.
Why can't we pay it in FY21 with the 1/12th? I don't understand. Why can't we do that?
Maybe we can.
Because they're fiscal 20 expenditures. So if they're not paid, there's really no mechanism to not pay a bill that you're aware of in the fiscal year. Even the unpaid warrant article that we have is to address bills that were not received or known about on June 30.
Yep. Oh, well. Okay. Well, let's sleep on that. Okay. So I'll send out a proposal for some meetings that we should, and I will try to reach out to Dawn and Tim regarding the middle school. And I need a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So
wait. Are there any citizen comments? There have been some citizens who have patiently waited through this whole, and I appreciate their attendance. Does anybody want to raise their hand? Anybody want to weigh in? I don't hear anybody. Anybody can unmute their mic who would like, but I don't hear anybody asking to be heard. So having that taken care of, I now need a motion to adjourn. And we're going to have to go through roll call, sadly. So moved. Second?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All right. Greg?
Yes.
I vote to adjourn. Mary?
Yes.
Dee?
Yes.
Yeah. Dick?
Yes.
Yes. Andrea?
Yes.
Wade?
Yes.
Parashar?
Yes.
Brian?
John looks so peaceful in front of that.
Chris?
Yes.
Phil?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
And Peter's still there. Peter?
Yes.
Yay. Okay, we are adjourned, and I so declare. Good night, everybody. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you, Dean.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.